All right, class, welcome. So for today's session on testing and assessment, I want to dive into a really fascinating case study. I think it's a perfect example of where standardized testing, the neat and tidy scores we rely on, slams right into the messy reality of a highly specialized profession. It's a story about music, about teaching, and about the subtle but incredibly powerful ways that language can make or break someone's success. So, let's just start with a quick thought experiment. I want you to imagine you are a seriously talented musician. You spent years, maybe decades, honing your craft. You've made it. You've been accepted into a prestigious master's program in the UK to become a music teacher. So, what do you think your biggest challenge is going to be? The complex musical theory? Advanced performance techniques? Well, for the group of students we're looking at today, the answer was something way more fundamental. Okay, let's get into it. This research we're unpacking focused on a very specific group: incredibly skilled Chinese musicians who came to the UK to train as elite music teachers. But pretty quickly, they started hitting a wall. And it had absolutely nothing to do with their talent on the piano or the violin. And that wall, that barrier, is what we in the field call discipline-specific language. Now, this isn't just about being able to, order a coffee or chat about the weather. This is the unique linguistic toolkit you need to function in your profession. For a doctor, it's the language of anatomy and diagnoses. For a lawyer, it's all that legal jargon. And for a music teacher, it's the very specific language of pedagogy, of theory, of expression. Now, here is the absolute bullseye for our class on assessment. Every single student in this study had passed the university's standardized English exam. On paper, they were good to go. Their proficiency was considered sufficient. But this whole study hangs on one critical question. Does a general proficiency score actually predict success when the linguistic demands are so incredibly specific? So to figure this out, the researchers went directly to the source. They just asked the students, hey, rate your own confidence in different areas of your English from 1 to 10. And this self-assessment, it gives us such a powerful glimpse into their actual lived experience. Something that a multiple choice test score just can't capture. First up, their overall English competence. They rated themselves at just over a 5 out of 10. I mean, just imagine trying to get through a demanding master's program when you feel like your main communication tool is only running at 50% power. That is just a recipe for constant stress and anxiety. And here's where it gets really critical. Their confidence in using English musical terminology, the absolute heart of their profession, drops even lower. It's actually below 5. This was their weakest point. So this brings us to the main event, right? Actually teaching in English. And again, the score is hovering right around the midpoint. They only felt about half confident in their ability to perform the central task they came here to master. I mean, these numbers, they just paint such a clear picture of profound uncertainty. This quote from one of the students, it just makes the data feel real, doesn't it? It's not about a lack of passion for music or a lack of knowledge. It's that awful feeling of having a whole world of ideas trapped inside your head with no words to get them out. That's the real human cost of a vocabulary gap. So how did this feeling of uncertainty actually play out? The research managed to pinpoint 3 key areas, 3 big challenges where this language gap became a serious, practical problem. And this chart illustrates their main worries brilliantly. Just look at this. A massive 78% of their reported weaknesses are in what we call productive skills, speaking and vocabulary. It wasn't about understanding what they read or heard. It was about producing the language themselves, on the spot, accurately in the high-pressure world of a classroom or an academic debate. And that vocabulary issue, it ran deep. You see, many of the students had only ever learned Western musical terms through their Chinese translations, which use different methods like transliteration, which just matches the sound, or free translation, which captures the meaning. So a word like sonata becomes zhou-ming-chu. Now, that's perfectly accurate in Chinese, but it created this huge mental gap when they suddenly had to discuss these core concepts using the original English or Italian words. The next big hurdle was academic writing. And we're not just talking about grammar mistakes. It was about the hidden rules of the game. They really struggled to figure out what assignments were asking for, to paraphrase correctly, and to grasp this very Western academic concept of critical engagement, which they often misunderstood as just being critical of themselves. And here's a perspective from one of the tutors that just hits the nail on the head. They saw how a limited vocabulary made a really tough skill, like paraphrasing, almost impossible. Students would try to swap out words, but without a deep sense of synonyms and nuance, they'd accidentally change the entire meaning of what they were trying to say. So, okay, what does all of this mean in the real world? These aren't just academic problems. They have profound, practical consequences. Let's take a look at how these language issues directly torpedoed their ability to teach, which, let's be honest, was the entire point of the program. The whole philosophy of the course was what's called pupil-centered teaching. It's all about spontaneous dialogue, being flexible, building a connection. But for these students, the reality was completely different. Instead of a fluid back and forth, there were these long, awkward pauses while they searched for a word. Instead of deep musical explanations, they had to fall back on oversimplified instructions. The language barrier literally forced them into a rigid, teacher-led style that was the exact opposite of what they were trying to learn. And in some cases, it got even worse than that. The intense pressure of being assessed, combined with that deep linguistic insecurity, led some students to a solution that, well, it pretty much destroyed the very idea of teaching. I really want you to let this quote from a tutor just sink in for a moment. A fully scripted lesson, an interaction so pre-planned that it's not even teaching anymore, it's a performance. It's a total breakdown of authentic, responsive pedagogy, all because of the crushing pressure created by a language gap. This is the most extreme and, frankly, heartbreaking consequence of the problem. Okay, so this brings us full circle, right back to the central theme of our class, testing and assessment. What does this case study force us to confront about how we measure language proficiency, especially when a profession is on the line? The current standard in the UK for what's called qualified teacher status requires a B2 level of English. This is the benchmark. And remember, all the students in the study had met or even exceeded this. By all official measures, they were proficient enough. But as we've just seen in painful detail, it clearly wasn't enough. That general score completely failed to predict the specific high-stakes challenges they would actually face. You know, it could measure their ability to write an essay on a generic topic, sure, but it couldn't tell you if they could explain the concept of staccato to a 10-year-old in real time. So, the crucial point, the big takeaway is this. The solution is not just throwing more generic English lessons at them. The answer is integrated language support that is tailored specifically to the discipline. We need to be teaching musicians the language of music pedagogy, not just the language of abstract grammar rules. And that leaves us with the final question, the one I want all of you to be thinking about. If our standard off-the-shelf tests are falling this short, what does a better assessment actually look like? How do we design tests that can accurately predict a person's ability to use language effectively within the complex, messy, nuanced context of their specific profession? That's the challenge for all of us, the next generation of linguists and assessment designers. So think on that. We'll discuss your ideas when we meet next week.